topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, you've heard it said that, words matter and names matter, like a democracy. And it would appear that ever since our democratic idea came into being, there's been these antithetical forces to undermine and knock it down. People have said, well, this doesn't make sense. It's never been done before. How can this happen? But yet here we are almost at 250 years, and this democratic republic keeps on marching about in spite of antithetical forces suggesting that, we're going to lose this democracy. And, sometimes I wonder if they even understand what democracy is all about. Dr. Dan McMillan is going to be joining us in just a moment. He's the author of the book, How Could This Happen?, which is about the Holocaust. We may touch on that. But more importantly, what we want to talk about is the group that he leads, which is Save Democracy in America. It's a nonpartisan campaign to put the American people back in charge by making voters the donors who fund election campaigns. Now, Dan earned a Ph.D. in German history from Columbia University, as well as a law degree. He's taught college-level history and prosecuted criminal cases at the Brooklyn DA's office. I want to bring Dan on right now. Dan McMillan, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us, sir.
Be with you, Bill.
Well, our democracy has quite the history. And, today you wonder with some of these kids talking about how our democracy is coming under threat. And I say kids, there's politicians as well. And it's almost like I want to hit the pause button and say, would you explain to me what you mean by democracy? Is that a fair question?
Well, I think there's some confusion out there. And I think especially the folks in Washington, I think are very confused about it. In fact, I think they've kind of forgotten what it is. And to me, it's what Lincoln said at Gettysburg: government of the people, by the people, for the people. And the government is really no longer of us or by us, because long ago, we, the people, stopped being the true constituents of our elected representatives, especially at the national level. They're donors, the people who pay the stratospherically high cost of their election campaigns are their true constituents. That's who they listen to. And we, the people, have become a nuisance. I mean, we're a necessary evil because they still need our votes to get into office. That makes us necessary, but we're an evil because ultimately it's the donors they have to answer to. And then they just have to figure out what slogans to offer us or ugly personal attacks on their opponents to get them to 51%. So, and for that reason, also, we're not really getting government for the people either. Ultimately, now we're getting government that kind of isn't really working for anyone, because in order to raise the kind of cash that you need to run for office, and the minimum price to the Senate has to be at least 10 million for a campaign, and we're seeing campaigns north of 100 million now. Is not at all uncommon. A cool billion or more for the White House seems to be the minimum. And to raise that money, you basically have to take money from everyone. It's not enough just to take money from, if you're in the House, to take money from the top industry in your district. You got to take money from every single special interest out there who will throw it at you. And what that means is you censor yourself to avoid offending any of these special interests. And the end result is that both parties are kind of blocked from offering a real positive program. There's no way forward. I guess the most dramatic example of how the system has broken down because of this is that we're staring down federal budget deficits of $2.5, even $3 trillion as far as the eye can see. And we're already getting to a point where all this public borrowing is going to start crowding out private borrowing, driving up interest rates. A lot of foreign borrowers who are have been buying American public debt are now saying maybe we're not a good credit risk after all. Another example, of course, is the cost of healthcare and how difficult it is to access it. We pay twice as much per healthcare per American per capita as in many other wealthy societies, yet we're getting terrible results. But you can't even talk about how we're going to fix that without if you have to kowtow to the lobbyists for pharma, for health insurance companies, and so on. Anyway, I'm taking too long to get to the point, but I think the thing is, what I'm saying is that the desperate hunger for this campaign cash has threatened to paralyze the system. And long ago, decades ago already, it excluded us, the American people, from the process.
Okay, I want to get into that, but before we do, let's go back even in terms of people who are put up, that are running for office. These have been predetermined. They've been already, whether it's the party or other interests, other money people who have determined who we're going to vote for. What choices do we have, Dan?
Yes, and that's a very good way of putting it, Bill. Now, it's not so much that I think groups of donors get together and pick candidates, but the way by default, in effect, the donors do choose the candidates that we're allowed to vote for, and
Exactly.
set limits to what the candidates can say. Because if you're going to be even taken seriously by the media, if your campaign is going to be viable, then the year before the election you already have to have raised an enormous sum. If you're running for the House, it's got to be, I think, at least $500,000. In the Senate, you're talking several $1,000,000 and so on.
Mhm.
And if you or your ideas are unattractive to deep-pocketed donors or even uninteresting, you don't draw their money, and your ideas and your candidacy die out of sight and out of mind. And so you've got this Darwinian process where only candidates that are attractive to donors come to the surface, and those are the candidates we're allowed to vote for.
Yeah. So even having some other ideas that are, that need to be represented and discussed are marginalized right from the get-go. They're scrutinized. So they're not even part of the national debate. If it's a federal candidate, even on a local level or a state level, that bit of the conversation is limited because they've hand selected or they've already predetermined who it is that we're going to vote for. So Dan, you talked about this shift, this paradigm shift that occurred. What happened? Let's go back historically and remind the people of what happened, what opened up the door to big money coming in and controlling our elections.
Probably the pivotal event was a Supreme Court case in 1976 called Buckley v. Vallejo. And that was Buckley v. Vallejo was the parent case of Citizens United and many other cases that we hear about. Citizens United is an important one, but it all goes back to Buckley. And what happened in Buckley was a crucial shift. In that case, the 7 justices decided that money spent to purchase influence in government by helping candidates, that this money is itself free speech. Up till that point, free speech was just what you and I are doing, and what free speech means kind of pretty much in every other country on earth. That is, free people get together and express their ideas without fear of any kind of punishment or coercion for expressing their ideas. Mm-hmm. It didn't include the money you might spend to purchase an audience for your speech. And more directly to the point these days, if you have enormous amounts of money, you can drown out the speech of ordinary citizens like you and myself.
Right.
But that shift, it crippled that ruling in Buckley v. Vallejo. They struck down parts of the Federal Election Campaign Act of 1974, which was a great campaign finance law regulation. And I guess another development was that toward the end of the 70s, the party organizations ceased to be the chief vehicle through which candidates reach the voters. They used to be mass organizations at the local level, and instead were replaced by expensive media buys, by TV ads. That made campaigns more expensive, and that between that and Buckley v. Vallejo, perhaps a couple of other factors, by the end of the 70s, the arms race in campaigns between the parties in fundraising and spending took off.
Mhm.
and the cost of campaigns has risen much faster than inflation ever since. Citizens United opened the floodgates together with another decision. It was a decision by the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, Speech Now, made possible the Super PAC, which is a political committee that nominally is independent of campaigns, but in fact does coordinate extensively
Right.
with the campaigns they help. The non-coordination is a fiction. It was required by the court decision, but the rules determining coordination are a joke. And basically, a super PAC can take donations of unlimited size and spend unlimited amounts of money to help a candidate they like or hurt the candidate's opponent. And you can, I mean, well, Elon Musk, for example, spent close to $300 million last fall helping
Mhm.
President Trump. There was also but enormous super PAC spending, for example, I think by George Soros and billionaires in the Democrat side.
Right.
This problem is 100% bipartisan. Both parties are making use
Was
of
there
super PACs.
was there unintended consequences here, Dan, when this was first addressed by the court? Was there some positive benefit to consider when they were looking at Citizens United?
I don't see how. I think that what they did is that the justices on the court under John Roberts decided that they wanted to apply this principle that money is speech to kind of the most rigorous way possible, and they thought that they were striking a blow for the freedom of speech. And I guess in some sense they could make possible complete freedom of speech for special interests, for corporations, for billionaires, but at the expense of everyone else's speech, which
Wow,
now is not heard at all.
yeah, well, you would have thought, again, in terms of doing no harm, that the courts would have looked at this to say, what is this going to do to the voter politic? And basically, they kneecapped the voter politic, did they not?
Completely. And I have to tell you, I have no insight into the motivations of our Supreme Court justices. But you look at a decision, it's one thing to have made the decision in Buckley, which I thought was really already a pretty clearly dumb idea.
Mhm.
To me, it's one of my favorite examples of the triumph of book learning over common sense. I mean, you need the handicap of a law degree for that to make sense to you, right? I mean, I don't think you could go into any bar in the country at any hour and find seven, normal people in whatever state of inebriation and get them to buy into the idea that money equals speech. But there it goes. At least in the Buckley decision, they had no way to foresee. Only I think it was Lewis Powell wrote the dissent and said, this is going to cause problems. But by 2010, by Citizens United, it was obvious that money had done terrible damage to our democracy.
Right.
Why that did not bother the justices? Well, I don't know them personally. I'm not a mind reader. It's almost enough to make you think that they are hostile to government by the people.
Mhm.
And as judges who have life tenure on the court, they're accustomed to and having an enormous amount of power in our political system and not being accountable. And maybe they think it's better that the people have less power and that people in Washington are less and less accountable because the people can't be trusted. There's a lot of that in our politics. There are a lot of people in Washington, I think, on both sides of the aisle, who think that the American people cannot be trusted. In some ways, I almost feel that that's, I want to be nonpartisan, but on the Democratic side, when I think about Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables remarks
Right.
or Joe Biden's Independence Hall speech saying MAGA Republicans are a threat to democracy, and asked the next day, well, who's a MAGA Republican? And he said, anyone who doesn't accept the result of a legitimate election, namely the election of 2020. And yes, tens of millions of Republican voters think or fear or suspect that the 2020 election wasn't on the level, but that does
Oh,
not
oh,
mean that
oh,
they
yeah,
don't want free elections. They do want free elections.
exactly.
And
And what's the problem? I mean, you got over 60%, Dan, even to this day, Democrats and Republicans that question the result of the 2020 election. It's never been adjudicated. It's handled by the media that just says, oh, you don't believe that? Well, if you don't believe that, then, you're some sort of Neanderthal.
Well, I think it actually has been I think there were various, because there were a lot of lawsuits at the time that the courts all threw out. But, my perspective on that at this point is that I almost don't even care whether there was fraudulent voting, whether there was tampering or not. What I care about
Mhm.
is that tens of millions of my fellow Americans think that there was or fear that there was. And what's so striking to me is that neither party in Washington has made any effort to address this fear.
Mhm.
Because the fact that this many Americans have this level of mistrust in our elections is itself a constitutional crisis. And it shows to me how little respect people in the system on both sides of the aisle have for us.
Mhm.
Because if you really believe in government by the people, then anything that's important to the people, if the people have this fear, a concern that is this important, even if you feel the fear is groundless, you make it your business to address that fear, because anything that the people care about is by definition important, because the people should be king in our system. And
Exactly.
if I had been Nancy Pelosi or Kevin McCarthy or Schumer or McConnell on January 7th, my first order of business, I would have gotten with the other three and I would have said, look, the American people, Americans don't trust, the elections. What we need to do is first, we need a commission, say like the 9/11 commission, we have to staff it, be led by people that literally everyone in the country trusts. And in our polarized environment, finding a bunch of people that everyone trusts, I don't know, maybe we'd be headed up by Tom Hanks or someone like that, but whoever,
Maybe not. Maybe, yeah, maybe not. But still, you're
and
exactly
investigate it, right? And
right.
and just like follow all the leads so that people, and the other thing to do is I think that both parties could come together and do a grand bargain, a bipartisan campaign bill. Republicans are more concerned about election security. Democrats want easier access to the ballot. My feeling is, no American citizen should have to jump through hoops to exercise this fundamental right. And on the other hand, no American should have to fear that anyone not entitled to vote is voting.
Mhm.
And why won't they do that? Because frankly, both parties would rather milk this issue for anger, to juice their base, to fire and to get their small dollar donations, than they would to actually address this issue. And that, to me, that's just such a lack of respect for the American people. It's a powerful symptom of what has happened to democracy in the
But,
land of its birth.
but they do this at their own expense, Dan, because what happened is the issue is trust. If I don't trust you, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. If I don't trust you, we got a problem. We can't communicate. And this is what it's come down to, is that you've got, like I said, over 60% of the people saying, I don't trust the number. You know,
Yeah,
it and then you say, well, it's been adjudicated. Yes, there's been over 60, maybe 70 different court cases, but then on
yeah,
technicality, I mean, there's been some wins out of it, and there's things that are coming out, slowly but surely, because that's the process that we go through, where you find out that, oh yeah, okay, we had people that were dead voting, and it wasn't just one or two. There were sizable numbers, and these numbers are coming out right now. And even in Atlanta, in Georgia, where Raffensperger was so protective about all this stuff, but he had no sense. There was no sense of earnestness about, hey, looking into this. It was just, hey, you're questioning me, and and he took it personally, as opposed to, as you're saying and suggesting, and I agree with you, that you've got to be able to stand back, from this and say, all right, I've got to, if the issue is the consent of the governed, I've got to respond to that, because that is a constitutional predicate. If there is no longer consent of the governed and it's compromised, is something that you manufactured, well, then that's a constitutional crisis in and of itself, is it not?
it is. I mean, to reaffirm, of course, my nonpartisan stance or rather bipartisan stance, because I feel that I take the side of all Americans on both sides of the aisle. I'm not going to express an opinion on whether or not the election was fair, but the fact that no one in either party has attempted to really address that fear on the part of
Right.
so many Americans, that speaks volumes about how little they respect us.
Well,
And
and
that's the issue.
it's also an issue for ourselves. How little do we respect the Constitution? We have to understand that integrity is key to the validity of our Constitution. If it gets compromised, the foundation falls on itself. And, I mean, here we are almost 70 years later, we still can't figure out who killed JFK. And I know these are conspiratorial issues, and I'm not trying to get you to go down some rabbit hole here, but there's a lot of questions here and doubts that should have been solved, especially, when you think about the millions of dollars that were spent investigating, JFK. We avoided, to your point, investigating what happened in the 2020 election. We spent a lot of money, millions of dollars, investigating, adjudicating, and putting in prison hundreds of patriots who just, came to DC and said, hey, I got a problem, and how is that unconstitutional? I'm not talking about the people that broke windows and did damage. I get that. Although, that's in contrast to the people who, 6 months earlier came to DC and destroyed property. And I didn't hear about anybody going to jail for an endless amount of time, from Black Lives Matter or Antifa during that period of time. So again, relevant to our Constitution and what's fair and right and just, there just seems to be this discrepancy, and these emotions and questions are hanging in the balance, and it puts it, to me, that's a threat to our democracy.
Again, I'm not going to offer an opinion on January 6th because of my stance, but I think what we need to focus on is how do we put the American people back in charge?
Amen. I'm with you.
Because that's what we have to do. Right. And maybe I could say a little bit about my effort and about voter dollars, because I think that's kind of germane at this point. So
yeah, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
We're following the flow. We're going with the flow, and I think we're covering a lot of important things. And this is really the issue. So I lead this effort. My goal is to put the American people in charge by making us the donors who pay for these election campaigns. As I was saying earlier, these election campaigns are fabulously expensive. And thanks to the Supreme Court, we can't place any limit on the cost of elections the way they do in every other wealthy democracy, because the court decided in its infinite wisdom that money is itself speech. Okay, that's the hand we're dealt. But what we can do in response is to make ourselves the donors. And the way we do that is a system that I call voter dollars. Mm-hmm. It has also been called democracy dollars, democracy vouchers, but it's been used in Seattle for city elections since 2017. I don't like the implementation because they used paper vouchers rather than online accounts. But the way it would work is that when you register to vote, you get an online account and a single national website. And for every 2-year cycle, federal election cycle, you get an allotment of campaign cash, $100 per voter in a presidential year, $50 per voter in the midterms, which are cheaper. You can't take the money out and spend it, but you go online and you direct that money to the candidates you support. So, you'd log onto your account, and the races that you're in which you can vote for and contribute money to come up for your House district. If there's a Senate race in your state that year, and of course in a presidential year for the White House, and there'll be a pocket, pockets for the primary and for the general. And at any time of day or night when you access the internet, you can send that money. It's much easier than the actual act of voting. You don't have to go to a physical place. Mm-hmm. And if we fund the system at the robust level that I'm calling for, then candidates who want to serve us can get enough money from us, from the voters, to run a strong campaign, and their opponent no longer has an excuse for taking money from George Soros or Elon Musk, big oil, big pharma, you name it.
You got to find a way to cut that off, that outside money, that particularly in these local races, when you've got people that aren't locally involved having such grave influence in these local elections.
Yes, and particularly service many of the smaller states and swing states, you have huge amounts of out of state spending. Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, the Supreme Court won't let us at this point cut off this outside spending. And so people have said to me, well, then won't the billionaires just swamp your voter dollar system with even more money? But I have two answers to that. One is that Jeff Bezos tried to do exactly that. In Seattle in 2018, he and his cronies decided they wanted to, I think, stop. It was a surcharge on the property tax.
Mhm.
They wanted a city council that was more pliant, and so they invested an unprecedented $1.5 million in 7 city council races. And because the voters of Seattle had been well educated to the role of money in politics and to how their democracy vouchers were part of their influence and say in how they were governed, it completely backfired. And the press, the media were outraged, the people were outraged, and the Bezos candidates went down to defeat. Now, this reform that I'm talking about, it's not going to come from Washington because everyone there, they are too dependent on their donors. They can no longer, they can not going to lead on this. So, but when we get the really big groundswell of and cross, Americans left, right, and center, which for this reform to make it happen, the American people will understand. And and any candidate that takes that, benefits from that kind of outside spending or takes money from corporate interests or unions, any other special interest, the people are going to punish those candidates at the polls. And what also once we get a voter dollar system and have built that political strength and institutionalized that, then we can take the final step, which is a campaign finance constitutional amendment that will effectively overturn Buckley v. Valeo and all these other cases and make it possible to limit spending. And then we can actually lower the cost of elections. And then the voter dollar system will cost less money because you won't need as much money to run a campaign. But that's down the road.
Well, Dan, what do you say? People might say, well, look, there's always the argument about voter ID. 80% of America says they want voter ID. You do something like this and they say, well, and of course the argument is, well, people can't access, it's problematic. They don't, I mean, it's to me, it's a bit of a silly argument, but that's just me. You do this and you give this money out, and some people might say, well, what about poor people? How are they going to access? Just everybody across the board gets 50, they get $100, and it comes from the Treasury.
Yes, I mean it's part of the federal budget. So, but as far as I guess people who don't own a computer or a smartphone would if you can't access online, then that can be a problem for them. But we can just make sure that there's a certain number of public computers in public libraries or in police stations, where have you, that people can go to. We might also have a system of paper vouchers as an alternative for people who don't have a computer or who don't like computers. As far as given the concern about who is voting and whether everyone who's voting is entitled to, you talked about voter ID. I think that a voter ID law is fine as long as there's flexibility on the documentation that you need to produce in order to get identification. And I think the government should provide this ID for free so that you don't have to have any money to exercise this basic right. There's a lot to be said for a national ID card, as they have in I think most other wealthy countries, that has all kinds of security features so that it cannot possibly be forged. That could also help with the enforcement of our immigration laws, for example. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot that can be done there. I think that's an implementation issue that can be addressed. I would like to address, because you said federal treasury. So one of the most frequent objection I get is, wait a minute, my tax dollars going for food stamps for politicians. I don't want to give these bums any money. And I think I should respond to that. And first response is, as a practical matter, these campaigns are very expensive. Candidates are going to get this money from somewhere. Right. If they don't get it from us, they're going to keep getting it from the special interests they have right now. And we, the people, are still going to be out in the cold. My second response is, this reform will pay for itself dozens of times over in wasteful spending that lobbyists extract from Congress, because the lobbyists and their clients donate to campaigns. Suddenly, Congress can tell these lobbyists to take a hike because the Congress is getting its money from the voters and is answering only to us. All kinds of wasteful spending, tax deductions for corporations that have no economic value. It would take us actually a long way toward balancing the budget, which we need to do.
Mhm.
So those are my two responses, and thank you for bringing that up.
Well, to me, it's always been about who you're beholden to. You and I had this discussion before, today, and that is that when you get elected during your orientation, they'll ask these politicians, these freshmen coming into office and say, okay, what are you going to do? Well, I'm fighting for this cause for my constituent. That's the most important thing I can do. And they go, bad answer. Your number one job
Exactly.
right?
Your job is to raise enough money for the next campaign.
Get
for your
reelected.
reelection.
And guess what? That starts as soon as this meeting is over. So as soon as this
Yes.
meeting is over, you go work the phones, right?
Well,
You work the phones
indeed,
and you
both
work King
parties
Street.
have call centers set up within walking distance of the Capitol, and you go into a cubicle, like in a customer service floor of any company, and there's for specifically for you and your district is a whole list of donors, and I think maybe there's a little bit of personal information about each donor, so that when you call them up, you can say, you know, say Biff, how is Buffy enjoying the garden club, and how is Biff Jr. liking Princeton? And I depend on you for your leadership and support. And can you help me out with $5,000 for my reelection? Um, a Republican congressman, God bless him, David Jolly from Florida. I think he only stayed there one term because he was so disgusted. And in 2016, so we're talking 9 years ago, he blew the whistle on this. He said that the typical member of Congress was spending 30 hours a week in D.C. They called it dialing for dollars, right?
Yes, exactly. Right.
Instead of doing the people's business. And of course, since the cost of elections has skyrocketed across the last four cycles, that they have to be spending a lot more than just 30 hours today, one has to assume. So it's really the most important skill that any politician needs to have if you want to go into national politics is fundraising, is begging for money.
Mhm.
And you have to ask yourself, does anyone become a leader that way? And I think that's also one of the reasons why in the presidential races, so many of the candidates are just so lacking in leadership qualities, lacking in convictions and courage, lacking in good ideas. It's very destructive. But on the other hand, I think the good news in all of this that we got to remember is this money-driven system has over time it has caused our so-called our representatives to unlearn democracy, to forget about the people, to lose respect for us, to not listen to us. But for the rest of us, for normal people, politics is only a tiny sliver of our lives.
Mhm.
And the American people have not forgotten that America stands for freedom, for government by the people. The American people very much, we want our rightful say in how we are governed. We believe in democracy. And if we can just put the people back in charge, the system's going to work very well again. I mean, you got to remember, I'm speaking in my capacity as an historian. I mean, yes, my field was German history, but I look at our history and you think about the early 30s to the early 60s, before presidents lying to us about Vietnam did so much damage to our democracy.
Right.
But in that period, we elect a string of 5 presidents that are very good or downright great. Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, JFK. Lyndon Johnson was a good president on the domestic front, gave us Medicare, Medicaid, civil rights. He ruined his presidency with Vietnam, but at home, and during those years, this country was unstoppable. I mean, think about it. Because the American people were in charge. We reinvent our government to survive the Great Depression. We rescue people from destitution with Social Security, invented in 1935. We defeat tyranny on 2 continents in World War II. We rescue Western Europe from economic chaos and communism with the Marshall Plan, the greatest act of generosity of any country in history. We lead the way in founding NATO. And in the 60s, we rally to Dr. King and to Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. and we end segregation and Black people get the vote back. And in 1965, with the Voting Rights Act, our country became the world's first and only multiracial democracy, which is a stunning achievement.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the point is, democracy works. When the American people are in charge, this country can do amazing things. And I think we will do amazing things again. And look, voter dollars is not a magic wand, but we don't need to fix everything this year or next. What we need is a shared goal, a concrete rallying point that's achievable, that Republicans and Democrats can rally to, can join hands together to take back, to restore the republic.
Something that's going to take us out of the political realm, because politics has gotten so mean and ugly that we've lost sight of the greater American idea. And that's what I'm hearing you say. And I agree with you. I think that there were certain things along the way. You mentioned FDR and LBJ as well. I think that part of the unfortunate thing with LBJ, as history is showing us, is that there was manipulation there. It was politically driven, some of that stuff that he came up with. As he told somebody in one of his constituents that, if they passed the bill, they would have blacks voting for them for the next 100 years. Well, and when you look at the result of what happened in the mid 60s with, some of these things that he put into play here, it didn't elevate Black people. I mean, even Bob Woodson, looks back historically and said, Blacks were much wealthier. They were happier. Their marriages were hanging together. There was less fatherlessness. I think it was, single digit that was in the Black community. And as soon as, Johnson comes in and passes the bill and has the influence on the Black community, all of a sudden you got this dramatic increase of, fatherlessness amongst the Black communities. And some of it, I say, you get these unintentional consequences I referenced earlier, Dan. And, the challenge we have with the bureaucracy is once something is in, it's very rare that they can go back and say, hey, look, let's adjust. I think a good idea at the beginning, but the way it's being implemented, just like you talked about with Citizens United. What was the good things about it? What was it that could be derived that would have been helpful? And what adjustments, if it's worthwhile to make adjustments, or just say, what, that was a bad idea at the time. It's even a worse idea now, and let's eradicate it.
Well, it'd be great to get rid of Citizens United, but there are only two ways to get rid of a Supreme Court decision about the constitutionality of laws. One is for the court to reverse itself, which is not happening. I think that's clear that the court's not going anywhere, that the majority that supported that decision is not going anywhere. The other way is via a constitutional amendment. And there is a very good organization called American Promise that is promoting a campaign finance constitutional amendment, and they've built an admirable amount of support. But realistically, it is so easy to block a constitutional amendment. My view is that until we got to get voter dollars first, because that will defang the special interests that otherwise would block this amendment. And I also think that voter dollars will reduce the polarization and partisan anger in our politics, because I think that, first of all, because it's something that it's a great way for Americans to come together and affirm the shared ideals that make us Americans, because it's ideals that make us Americans. Government by the people may be the most important because we invented it in its modern form. And I think if we can come together and notch such a big win for ourselves together, we're going to work together more effectively on everything we need to do. But anyway, I'm rambling a little bit and I cut you off.
I think you bring up something here, Dan, that triggers the thought is that really, like any organization, people want to be heard.
Yes.
And particularly with this great American idea. I mean, as we said several times, a government of, for, by, and we the people. I mean, that statement in and of itself is quite the commandment, I believe, for the constituents, that you cannot sit on your couch, put your heels on the desk, and just think somehow you did your part because you voted. This is the type of government that you need to activate. I say activate your citizenship. You got to be involved. I mean, how much time are you spending a week or a month even, calling your congressman, holding them in check, just saying, hey, look I'm watching you. And this is what we have to do is activate. And if doing it with donor dollars begins to do that, and the people have a say again in their government, wow, I mean, the sky's the limit, Dan. I think, the potential that we have.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because, and one of the things that we get a lot of things with voter dollars. We get better candidates who want to serve us. We get a political system that works, and we get better voters, because now you have so much more reason to inform yourself, and you feel empowered. One of the things I think that is one of the political strengths of this reform, and one of the ways that it benefits the country, is the way that it directly and sort of vividly, concretely empowers each one of us. Right now, so many Americans tune out politics because we feel powerless, and that's not irrational, because to a large degree we are powerless. But this way, we literally put the coin of political influence into your hands to do as you see fit. And candidates now come to you, not just for your vote, but for something they need a lot more urgently than the vote, which is the money, because if they don't have the money, they can't ask anyone for their vote. And I think it will really put us in the driver's seat, where we belong, as our founding fathers wanted for us when they wrote our Constitution. And I think that, once again, with the people in charge, I think there's no limit to what this country can achieve, because we have so many strengths. One thing I would like to say also about the ugliness in our politics, it's coming from the political level. It's coming because the money creates an incentive to divide and conquer, because they're beholden to their donors, neither party is delivering for us on the basic economic needs that we all have. And so what they do is they play upon our prejudices to turn us against each other, to distract us from our failures. And the thing is that, but below the toxic level of politics, we actually are less divided by our prejudices than we have ever been. I mean, you think just about racial prejudice today versus 60 years ago. I'm not saying, and look, we still have a ways to go, and I'm not saying there still is not prejudice, and everyone has prejudices. There's not just prejudice by race, there's by class or religion. Of course, we're human. Human beings have prejudices, but we are actually below the toxic level of politics in our communities, in our workplaces, in our schools. We are more open to each other, we are more fair to each other, and we are more kind to each other than we have ever been. So the notion that we Americans cannot come together and, put our heads together, roll up our sleeves, use our common sense, and fix what's broken in the country is nonsense. The only thing that's holding us back and turning us against each other is this money-driven politics. We fix that, I say this country will be unstoppable.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dan, because the thing is that politics is out of order. What should happen is politics should be downstream culture. And something happened that shifted politics to where they became upstream culture. So politics is influencing culture, not the other way around. And that I see as causing an incredible amount of problem and friction among the people, because, as you say, and I think the donor dollars would contribute to this, because we would have a say. And when we're being manipulated by these politicians, we're not going to take them, as gospel. We're going to say, well, I'm going to look into that, or, that doesn't square up, because we're going to appreciate and honor the culture above politics. And if we do that and we're honoring our neighbor more than a politician, I think you got a different dynamic potentially that could occur here, that it's win-win for all. What do you think?
That's such an interesting and suggestive thought. I mean, what you're saying about politics currently being upstream from culture, I guess the main way in which that resonates with me, and it may not be exactly the same kind of mechanism or thought process that you're thinking about, but what seems to me is that having a political system where the public face of politics is always fake, where, as Hillary Clinton notoriously said in one of her overpaid Wall Street speeches, politicians have two positions in every issue: the private position for the donors, which is what matters, and the public position for the voters. That's inherently corrupting, and that in turn, it's morally corrupting. It is part of what I think has damaged the moral fiber
Exactly.
of American society.
Yeah.
And I think that when you have leaders, it prevents, because the problem is you can go to Washington with the best intentions and be a man or woman of integrity. But if you have to play this game and raise money and then turn around and try to buy off the voters with some empty slogans, which is what they do,
Mhm.
it corrupts you, it ruins you.
Right.
And it's not even their fault. I think one thing I always like to say is that I think this is not something that any of us chose. The donors and the donors who give the money, the candidates who take it. I'm not saying that they haven't become corrupted or selfish, but ultimately they're doing what they have to do. They're responding to the perverted incentives of this system.
Exactly. The
You
system.
change the incentives, you start getting better behavior. And so I always like to say, you know, ultimately, the real dividing line in this country is not between Republicans and Democrats. It's between the American people as a whole against a broken system. And what broken system is the money. Our fellow Americans are not the enemy. The money's the enemy.
Yeah. Look at the
And it is,
results, Dan. Look, you're an academic. You always look at the end to say, okay, what is the result that we're getting, what we're putting into it? And this is what we're seeing quite clearly. I agree with you. The system is broken. It doesn't give our politicians, people that we want to represent us, a fair chance to go and be successful, because we're putting them into a meat cleaver, so to speak, a system that's already defined. They can go in with their idealism and everything, and in a matter of weeks, if that long, they're chopped up like hamburger meat.
I think they already get chopped up during when they're running the campaign. And the other thing is, you got to ask yourself how many good people aren't going into politics, because you get people out there with great ideas and who've got the courage to lead, and then they go talk to a campaign manager, and the first question from the campaign manager is, how much money can you raise?
Right, exactly.
Are you a millionaire? Can you self-fund? Do you have millionaire friends? Can we hold a fundraiser at your country club? And if the answer to those questions is no, the campaign manager is going to say, well, I'm not going to work with you and you've got no chance. So we're also missing out on all kinds of talent that
Right.
we could have in Washington. The
Well,
other great thing about
look at
Go ahead.
Elon Musk, for example, Dan. I'm sorry to cut you off here because we've
Sure.
only got a couple of minutes left here. But look at Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a talent.
He's a very impressive guy. I personally don't like the idea of someone basically buying a kind of cabinet position through campaign donations, but he is a really impressive guy. Um, in any case, there's no shortage of really talented Americans
Mhm.
who are patriotic and have of goodwill, who want to make the country stronger, who want to help each other Americans. Um, One other thing about this voter dollars system is that because right now in the present, if you want to challenge an incumbent, even in the House of Representatives, you almost have to be a millionaire and with millionaire friends. But with voter dollars, we can get people in Congress from all walks of American society, so that all kinds of different points of view and we are represented, and we can have primary care physicians and school principals or teachers or police officers, who have you, but real estate agents. Anyway, people of all kinds of different, so that we don't
Background.
just have this rich person's view in Congress.
You're exactly right. Dr. Dan McMillan has been our guest. He leads Save Democracy in America. It's a nonpartisan campaign to put the American people back in charge by making voters the donors who fund election campaigns. Dan, we got a minute left. I'm going to let you summarize and bring us home, if you would, please.
Okay, I think the thing I most want to say is that it's easy to be discouraged, but let's not forget that for every other people on earth, democracy is an option. For us, it's existential because it defines us. It's who we are.
Right.
And no one does government by the people better than Americans, except when we are thwarted by factors beyond our control. But the thing is, we just have to remember this fight for voter dollars to take our country back may not be easy, but it is simple. All we really need to remember is who we are and what our country stands for.
Well, Dan McMillan, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate the time, sir. You take care.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Dr. Dan McMillan, Save Democracy in America. He is also the author of the book, How Could This Happen? Explaining the Holocaust. Thank you for sharing a part of your day with us. And I hope you've been blessed and informed by what Dr. Dan has brought to the marketplace in order for us to think about, is it, can we do something different? Can we save democracy? Can we, as you've heard me talk before, I'm a firm believer in a government of, for, by, we the people. And we have been undermined in so many different ways. And what Dr. Dan is bringing to the fore here is one, just I think a great idea that has potential, but it's not going to be anything that happens overnight. You know this. We've been working on this for almost 250 years. But, there is a time for revolutionary ideas to come in forget about saving democracy. Let's really maximize our democracy and this great American idea that benefits all of us. So again, thank you for being with us, and God bless you, and may God bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. Thanks again for being with us. Take care. God bless.